Welcome to Empirical Pod. I'm your host, Tim Day. Thank you so much for continuing this journey with me, where I get to sit and talk to all my favorite people. You guys remember the drill. Don't forget to like, follow, share, subscribe. Let's get into today's episode. I do love this space.
It is really nice.
Yeah, I feel like I'm being spoiled every time I'm here.
Yeah, it's really cute.
Yeah. All right, so we're here with... Man, I'm so annoyed and, so sick of myself, every week doing the same thing of introducing a guest and then being like, oh, they're married now, and I don't know their married name, but...
I haven't changed my name, so...
So, Jessica...
Punzo.
Is that how it's pronounced?
Punzo, yes.
I feel like Punzo is funner.
Not for me.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
That's actually the first time I've ever heard your name out loud.
Yeah, Punzo. Like
Punzo.
Munzo.
Like uncomfortably Italian.
Yes, like that. But I've been correcting people my whole life, so...
Yeah.
No
that
biggie.
makes sense too. So you're Dr. Punzo.
Yes.
That sounds fun, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Punzo.
That's right. Yeah, no, I didn't change my name when I got married. A lot of it was because that's how I got my degree, and
Right,
that's how people knew me, and...
Mm-hmm. Well,
you know?
like, not for nothing, it's one thing to just be somebody your whole life, but then you built a profession as well.
Totally.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the things I thought was slick a couple weeks ago, my friend Kelly, she's married to my friend Joe, and she changed her middle name to her maiden name.
Oh, interesting.
So her last name was Green.
Yeah.
But she just got rid of her middle name, so she's Kelly Green DeGand.
Oh, wow. My mom's maiden name is Green.
Really?
Yeah. Weird.
That is weird. Let's not dig into that.
Okay.
So where does your story start?
Oh, man. I guess it depends on what story we're talking about. But
Like,
I think we'll talk about my psychology journey.
Well, I feel like we gotta clarify your personal story. So literally, where did you grow up? Where were you born?
Got it.
We'll get to psychology eventually.
Okay. Yeah, so I was born technically in Hoffman Estates, so northwest suburbs. I grew up in Carroll Stream.
So you the hospital's in Hoffman Estates, but you grew up in Carroll
Yes, the
Stream.
hospital is in Hoffman Estates, yeah. And then...
That feels far away.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how it worked out. I think my mom was working there, or I think it was Humana Hospital.
Yeah.
When it was at that point. But my mom is a microbiologist, so...
Jeez, that's awesome.
Yeah, so... I just know that's the place of my birth, but when I think of where I grew up, our first house was Hanover Park.
Yeah.
And then right next door to Carroll Stream is where I grew up most of my life.
My grandparents, for when I was young, lived in Carroll Stream, so I spent some time there.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time, my whole life. And my parents just moved out of that house probably, 3 years ago.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, so you, literally your whole
my
life
whole
was
life.
there.
Yes. So, yeah, my parents... Both of my parents are immigrants, so that I think is an interesting part of my
literally
story.
From Italy?
So my dad is from Italy. Yes, he came here they both came here when they were teenagers, but my mom's from Ireland, so hence Green.
Oh, good. So that's why you talk with your hands and you've got a temper.
Yeah, exactly. The combination of both is a really wonderful one.
Perfect.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm trying to think. Grew up there, went to school there.
Do you remember in those younger years too? Do you have siblings?
No, I'm an only child.
So you're spoiled.
You're it makes sense now.
Do you see me putting pieces together as I'm talking? Do you remember as you're coming up and going through all that stuff? Because I'm sure you had your own struggles and stuff, but I feel like you had a pretty normal, quote unquote normal upbringing.
Yeah.
Do you remember? Was there ever a draw to psychology at a young age, or is this something you got into much later?
Much later, I think. I think growing up, I will say, when it came to thinking about what I wanted to do, right? I guess I'll kind of go forward to go backward, but...
this is going to feel like an ADD session with me because I'm going to jump all over.
Don't worry, I'm okay with it.
I let the audience piece it together on their time.
That's fine, right? That's what they should do. So when I was in high school... I think I'll say this, I went into college pre-law. So I thought I wanted to be a lawyer.
That's what I feel like I remember that. Like, because we met a long time ago.
Yes.
When you were probably like just starting college or just in college.
God, yeah, when was that?
And I feel like you were like, I'm going to be you were a law student.
Was I? I feel like oh God, okay, so hold on. I think I was in grad school, I had to, I don't know now, because
I think you're a little younger than the rest of us.
yes, I'm 38.
Yeah, so it's like 3 years now.
Yeah,
That's not a big deal.
but I think it's interesting because I'm thinking of when that time period was, and I think I was going into my graduate program at that time.
Yeah.
But I might have talked about that I was pre-law prior.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so I went in, I kind of always, having immigrant parents, it's a pretty like, I think the expectation was very high. So it was whether I was going to be a doctor or a lawyer or something.
Yeah.
It was really, I think whether it was spoken or unspoken, it was really like you're going to sort of make something of yourself.
Did you feel the anxiety of that, or was it just like a presumption?
It's hard. I will say I don't have a lot of memories from my childhood, but I think it was just an unspoken expectation.
Yeah.
Right? My parents really...
well, they came here with nothing or very minimal.
Yeah.
And like you just said, your mom's a microbiologist.
Yes.
What does your dad do?
He's an engineer. Yeah, so
it just makes me laugh because I'm like, my dad worked in a factory and my mom was a telephone operator, and I've definitely climbed to mediocrity. And you're like, I guess I'll be a doctor.
I guess it was just, like I said, it was just, I don't know, it was this sort of unspoken, academic achievement was very celebrated in my family.
Did it give you validation growing up? Or like, because some of that can feel unhealthy in retrospect.
Yeah. I mean, I think, like I said, it's hard for me to pinpoint, but I think I definitely knew that was something that they were proud of me, right? Yeah. And that was something I got a lot of.
Made you feel better. Like if I work hard, they'll be happy.
Totally. But I also enjoyed it. Like, sure. I love school. Like, I love learning. That's always been, so I've loved all of that. So I don't know if it was just growing up that way. And it's interesting because, I say my parents were these two things, but my dad was like a trade engineer. So he's a mechanical engineer. So at that time, you didn't go to school for an engineering degree.
Right.
Like, it was like he learned through
on the
trade.
job.
Yeah. So like higher education. And my mom, similar, I'm pretty sure my mom went to college. My dad didn't though, right? So, but it's interesting. Both of them are very smart in very different ways. But I think it was always like, well, you're going to do that. There was no question of if I was going to college. It was
I feel like that's one of the things too, is like, we came here to start a life. Mm-hmm. You're going to go as far as you can with the tools at hand. Totally. And they never said that, right? That was nothing that was ever said. Like I said, I think it was just this unspoken sort of thing that was like, yeah, like we came here and made this life and we want you to be successful. So it kind of just panned out that way. So I knew it was like medicine or law were really the two things I was focused on at that time. And I was like, medicine is not what I'm interested in. So I'm like, let me go pre-law. And I took a couple of classes and I was like, this is not it for me. Like, it was so boring. And I'm like, no, I probably didn't give it enough time, to be fair, but... What were you thinking, like, was the ultimate end goal their lawyer? Yeah. Well, their end goal or mine? Yeah, yours. Yeah. For being like, I guess I'll just be a lawyer. Yeah, I thought, well, I'm good at arguing, so... Yeah, but, like, not for nothing, a lot of being a lawyer is looking stuff up. Yep. And a lot of, like, memorization of these absurd... little silly things, and knowing when and where to put those, which I feel, man, even talking about it is so boring. No, I just, and I remember, I think I don't know what class it was, like ethics or not ethics, logic. It was like logic, intro to logic. It was a Friday morning, like 8 a.m. class, and I just was like, this is the bane of my existence. And at the same time, I was taking an abnormal psychology course. Yeah. And I was like, this is fascinating. And that's really kind of... Abnormal psychology. Mm-hmm. That was the course. That does sound way better. Like, I love psychology. I'm not educated by any means. I'll sound as presumptuous as possible in this as I'm talking. But I've read a lot of, like, I've read books if that's impressive.
Yeah.
But abnormal psychology sounds like it would be interesting. What kind of falls into that?
So it's more about like pathology, right? So all the things that deviate of what we call normal. And it's really interesting to think about what I learned then to where the field of psychology is now, right? Because and it'd be I don't think they call it abnormal psychology now. I don't really know. I think if I could think about it, I bet that they wouldn't, because it's kind of like,
I wouldn't think so either.
You know, it feels gross.
It's a little harsh.
Yeah, you know, sometimes the class is like psychopathology, so like, right? But even then, I think now we're running into places where, right, what is normal?
Sure.
Right? Yeah. And diagnosing feels so, I guess the word I'll just say is like icky sometimes. Right? Yeah. We need to do it for insurance. Otherwise, though, I think it's
even just for categorization, like to get information. Like it's one of those things, like I've always disliked labels in general, but it's also how society functions. And to collect and analyze data, right, you're going to need some sort of hierarchy and words to attach to things. Totally. It's just when we as a people start taking those labels too seriously.
Right. Yeah, and it just others people, you know. I think it's hard because I understand some of the utility, you know, can be, well, if we have these categories, then we can treat people, right, and certain treatments. And I see there's some utility there, but I think overall it's really reductionistic.
It's even like a double-edged sword where sometimes it's when you other people like that also, then they have a camaraderie. So it's kind of like, it could be good, it could be bad.
Yeah, you know, then I think of then a lot of times what I talk with my clients about is, you know, sometimes there's too over-reliance on a diagnosis, right, and clinging so tightly to it, and sometimes using that as an excuse for behavior.
I feel like that's, especially with the movement over the last 10, 20 years, I feel like there's definitely an unfortunate side effect of us leaning into certain things, of people being like, do something horrible and then be like, it's the same thing they do with astrology. We're like, I'm such a Scorpio.
Yes.
Like, no, you're just a bitch.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I mean, I call my clients out on that, you know, and to say, and I don't, you know, like I said, if I didn't have to diagnose, I probably wouldn't. But in session, you know, a lot of times it's not something that I talk about, like, unless a client is interested, you know, I'm not like, here's what I'm diagnosing you as, you know, and I think a lot of it is because I don't want to limit them. I don't want to put them in a box. And quite frequently, I keep looking because that's the DSM over there.
Yes.
That's our manual that we use.
We are, of course, in Dr. Melissa's office.
Yes.
And she's left out one of her diagnostic books.
Yeah.
Does it feel like you're home a little bit?
A little bit, right? Yeah. It's very comforting. But yeah, I feel like, and quite frankly, most people don't fall into the category, all the little criteria, you know, because every person is unique.
Right.
You know, so I don't know. It feels reductionistic, and like I said, there's pros and cons to it because I think there is, like, people, like, let's say, who have like borderline personality disorder or depression or anxiety, whatever, if they meet someone else who has, like, I think you're saying that diagnosis, they feel connected in some way, right? And maybe they wouldn't have met unless there was a group specifically for them.
Sure.
You know, so I think that can be helpful.
But at the same time, though, like you said, those, I feel like, started as a precise diagnosis, and as time's gone by, it's such a blanket to just say behavior disorder or especially depression. Yeah. Like, geez, there's not... I can't wait to see, like, in 20 years when there's, like, 100 different kinds of depression as we kind of start zeroing in on these specific things.
Totally.
Just to see what this landscape looks like then. So when you pivot from... How long have you been in school when you pivoted from law to psychology?
Fast. Like, that first semester.
When you got that first class.
Yeah, like couple classes, and I was like, no. And I think I was just so interested in the abnormal psychology class.
Was it that quick too, where you're like, did you immediately think, I'll just PhD?
So it's interesting. I can't remember exactly, but when I switched my major...
you were at least like, I'll get the bachelor's and then master, or did you...
I think I was just like, no, I can get a doctor, and I'm just going to go there.
Nice.
Right? Again, it's that sort of expectation.
Yeah. Did you marathon it then? Like, no time off and just burn through it?
I went straight from undergrad to my doctoral program.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty incredible. Do you have a a specific focus then with your education?
Yeah, so my specialty is trauma and PTSD.
Really?
Yes, so I went to Adler University and I got a concentration in traumatic stress studies. So, which is one of the few doctoral programs that has that specialization.
Yeah. That's
So-
amazing. So I used to do trauma recovery with kind of like a very new age sort of hypnosis style.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, which I would. I always like talking to people that like do it professionally. Where I'm like, all right, this is like because we have the same goal, but we're going about
Yeah.
it very differently. And what's effective, what's not effective.
Totally.
And, you know, kind of what's similar as far as like, I'm sure you've dealt with it a lot where people will come for one session and they're like, all right, I'm better, or they
I
leave
actually
feeling
have
better.
never had that.
That's great because I feel like that's a misunderstanding of the process.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, you'll feel good in that session, but like you have to do real work over periods of time
Yeah.
to kind of get somewhere.
Well, yeah, and I will say I haven't had that experience because people who are coming to me have like pretty intense
Yeah,
histories.
right.
So that one session is like the literal tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I would say on average, I typically see people for, like right now, if I'm thinking about my caseload, like the average length would probably be 4 to 5 years. Average.
Wow, really?
Yeah, so I have a couple clients right now that I have been seeing for 7 years.
Wow, that's incredible.
I'm really blessed to be able to do that, if I'm speaking quite frankly.
Yeah. Now, so when did you graduate then with your doctorate?
2013.
So did you work or do you work somewhere, or do you have a private practice?
Right now I have a private practice, yes.
Okay. Did you start that like
No, I
right?
didn't start there. So I started in my first job outside of like, you know, on my own, sort of being on my own, was at the center on Halstead, which is a large LGBTQ health center, and I was the director of their anti-violence project.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so I was working with all queer people who had experienced trauma or violence. And doing a lot of community work there. And while I was there for about 2 years, and in that duration had gotten pregnant and realized, oh, I can't make the commute to the city anymore, and I really don't want to work full time. I want to like spend time with my son. And then from there I just transitioned into my private practice, and I've been there for like 7 years almost. Yeah.
Wow. I like how you said got pregnant. Like you got married at some point.
I did get married at some point, yes.
How did you meet your husband?
High school, actually.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So you've known him a long time.
A very long time.
Yeah. So did you guys date in high school? Or were you just friends?
We were never.
We hung out in high school.
we were interested in each other, and
Sure.
we never were seriously dating. It was more casual, on and off, on it. So it was like on and off, basically our.
Yeah, I'm saying life happened for a while then, and you guys
Yeah.
ended up coming back together, or did you never lose touch?
Yeah, we always would kind of. So when we met, it was me going into my senior year, and he's a year older than me. And so he was going off to college.
Yeah.
And so we met, we hit it off like instantly, and we were kind of together, but then he was going away. I was gonna go, I forget how it was working out, but.
But did he go out of state for college?
No, he went to Western.
Okay, so
And
still like.
but it was far enough,
Right.
that we weren't gonna see each other. And, you know, I think you could just imagine a freshman boy going to college and me being in high school, like that wasn't going to work. We visited each other, and then I went to Eastern, and then I had serious relationships in between that, and so did he, but we would always end up reconnecting somehow. So literally every time, like he would break up with someone, he would like reach out to me, or vice versa. And at the very last time, we're like, what are we doing? Like, why don't we just like try to actually, because we had never really dated like seriously.
Right.
And so that was 2011.
Yeah.
We're like, let's try this for real. And we've been together ever since.
I think it's got to feel like such a natural fit. Like, to quote Beauty and the Beast, it's a tale as old as time.
Yeah.
But I'd be curious too, is kind of coming up that way, because I feel like you're both highly intelligent people and realistic people. Mm-hmm. To be like, okay, we're kids, and this is where our lives are taking us.
Yeah.
we'll figure this out eventually.
Yeah, and I think at the time, we didn't, at least I didn't know that. I don't think he knew that either. I think we just met and we weren't ready for each other at that time. And I think we really needed to have other experiences to say, okay, this is the person for me.
Do you think that there's something subconsciously that kept every other relationship from crossing a specific boundary?
Potentially.
Yeah.
It's interesting, but in my I'm kind of maybe jumping ahead, but in my recent psilocybin journey, in that journey, he was very present, even though he wasn't there.
Yeah.
And I had this experience of like being with him in some other lifetime or other like dimension. So, and that was I felt that very strongly, like we were connected in some other life.
That's amazing, because I'm a big believer in like all these different realities stacked up on each other and things like that, and how like anything you can think of exists in some reality, right? So it's incredible to think that almost this beautiful story of like in every reality you guys end up together.
Yeah.
And it's just, that's why like it's overwhelming when you can kind of get those sorts of visions.
Yeah, it was so thinking about like sort of, that's what I thought about when you asked your question of like, I think there was probably some like gravitational pull or something that kept saying, go back here for both of us.
Yeah. So you didn't just get knocked up.
No, I didn't.
You ended up getting, you guys must have got married pretty quick then.
Well, like I said, we started seriously dating in 2011 and then...
Or did you guys have, did you have your child first?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. So then we got married in 2015 and then we had my son in 2017.
I thought you said you got pregnant in 2013. Or is that when you started your...
That's when I started my doctoral program.
Ah, yes.
Yes.
I'll pay attention.
That's okay. It's a lot of numbers.
It's
my life, not yours, so...
I'd be just as lost in my own life.
Yeah, it's okay.
All right, so you start... man, how rewarding was it working in downtown, though, with that particular program?
Yeah, amazing, it's a community that's super close to my heart, and that I'm pretty connected with. And I loved that work and I wish I could have kept doing it. It wasn't feasible with having a small child at the time. So moving into a private practice was just way, way easier.
Yeah, because I remember thinking, I thought you lived in Chicago.
I did at one point when I was doing my doctoral program. I lived down there, so for about 3 or 4 years. But then I lived in California. That's where I did my postdoc. So I lived there for 2 years. I did my internship and my postdoc out there, and then came back into Carroll Stream. So I lived in the city while I was doing school, and then went out for internship and postdoc out there. Then came back here, and then worked in the city. But when I moved back here, I was living with my parents.
Yeah.
Because my husband and I were going to get married, and so we wanted to wait until we could find a place after we got married. So yeah.
Silly to spend 2 rents, right?
Yeah.
What? So as far as starting a private practice, what does that look like from the ground up?
I kind of just winged it, if I'm being quite honest. Unfortunately, in graduate school, they don't teach you the business of psychology at all.
You have to take business.
And so it was a steep learning curve. But I remember, basically after having my son, I said to my husband, what am I going to do? I want to be with him, but I had to work.
Sure.
Right. And I never wanted to be a stay-at-home mom.
Right.
That was never on my agenda. Because I love what I do, right? So I was just like,
But 50 to 60 hours a week is not realistic.
No, and just the driving and the commute and all of this stuff, and we were trying to figure it out. And he's like, why don't you just open up your own practice? And I was like, oh no, I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
Right? I really didn't, and I was scared. And he's like, it can't be that hard.
I was saying, did you find with the idea, it feels overwhelming?
Yeah.
But then when you get into it, you're like, okay, people do this. It is possible.
Yeah, I think, and so I went to Adler, and Adler is really focused on social justice, right? And so that was a lot in my training and what I believe in a lot of community-based work, right? And like non-for-profit, like Center on Halstead is a non-for-profit, right? So I really envisioned myself in a larger system and doing that kind of work, because when I was there, I was able to provide therapy for free for victims of violence or trauma, right? And that, like, honestly, if I could do that now, that's what I would do.
That's what I would love to do, like, on a smaller scale.
Yeah.
Like, if I could just talk with people and coach people through stuff like that.
Yeah.
That they just come to me and they get it for free.
Yeah.
Because that was the problem I had with the stuff too, is like I don't like soliciting myself, especially like I understand everything has a price and your time is worth whatever, but I think that these are the sorts of things that should be available to everybody.
Totally.
And that how we get money from it should look different than somebody coming in and handing you money.
100%.
So I feel like we definitely are worth the money. I just I'm not sure where it should come from.
This is the sort of crisis, the sort of dilemma of psychology and psychologists, and I talk about this often, is that, our time is valuable, right? And we've spent so much money on our education.
Well, also, not only do you've spent so much, but you have to continue to spend so much, because it's not like, all right, you learn psychology, you're done.
Right.
This is a forever, and it changes fast.
Absolutely. And, it's hard. And I think typically people who get into psychology, right, care about people and want to help people. And so it is hard for us, I think, to ask for money for these services, because I think a lot of us would do it for free if we could. Sure. Right. But at the end of the day, like, we have bills, we have student loans, we have lives, we have to make a living too. But it's tough. Yeah. It's the toughest part about psychology.
How did you decide on a space then?
So at the time, my husband's like, you should do this. I'm like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. And, and luckily he's very like business minded and, was great and helped me a lot in that space. I forget how it ended up happening, but someone I went to grad school had a space and was offering it for subleasing.
Oh, nice.
In Oak Park. And so I reached out to her, and she also helped me a lot with just like answering questions about billing and how to be on the panels and how do I do this. So yeah, she really helped. And it was just like learning as I went, if I'm being honest. It was kind of like, okay, I found the space, I created an LLC, and then got on the insurance panels, and then just had a Psychology Today profile. Yeah. And then
how'd you get a Psychology Today profile?
Just
like, ask for one?
Yeah, you just sign up.
Because you're part of the psychologist board. Is there an APA or something?
Yeah, so there's APA is American Psychological Association, and then every state has their own association as well. But yeah, you're a member, but that doesn't necessarily, that's a nationwide organization. It doesn't necessarily get you the referrals that you need. Sure. But Psychology Today is such a great, it's a therapist finder, right? Yeah. I mean, it's like one of those ZocDoc or whatever, when people try to find doctors and medical doctors, it's very similar. So it's, I say it's like the dating profiles of psychologists, right? Because you have your little picture, you have your little bio, and all of this stuff, and you pay a monthly fee to list your practice on there. And if anyone's ever looked, I highly recommend, if you're searching for a therapist, to use that tool, because you get to look at a person's face, you get to read about their approach, and you kind of can decide about who seems like a good fit for you. So
that makes sense. So you've got the space.
Yep.
You've got your little
put my little thing online.
Little commercial.
Yeah, my little dating profile online.
But it's so tough though, because it feels weird to solicit yourself in that way, especially with that kind of focus where you're like, you've probably got problems. Come talk to me about it. Like, it's very, I don't know. There's just something that feels weird about it.
It is strange. And then over time it gets less strange. Oh, and then I created a website too. And then, I just waited, and it didn't take long.
Really?
No, not at all. Probably within 6 months I had a full caseload.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you have people at least start trickling in right away? So now you're paying for a building, you've got, you just added more bills. You have to turn a profit. Hope the goal is to at least pay for itself before you can even think about it being profitable. Right. So 6 months can be a long time of being uh-oh.
Yeah, no, I think it's hard to kind of remember. I should also say my memory is very bad. But I think it was just started with a couple, and then it just kind of went from there. But yeah, it definitely wasn't profitable probably in the first month or two, couple months.
The 6 months to a full caseload is amazing.
Yeah.
I feel like the area is also really good. Like it's primed for that.
Yeah, and I love Oak Park because it's such a mixture of people, you know, and people can come from the city if they want. People can come from the suburbs if they want. And
it is a really nice, like it's a very diverse area.
Yes.
And it's so accessible.
Yes, and that was what was important to me because I knew I couldn't go downtown, right? Obviously, that's why I quit my other job. But I knew I wanted to be close enough so that people could access from downtown if they wanted.
Right. Do you do stuff online also, or is it all in person?
So when I started my practice, no, I didn't do any online things because that really wasn't a thing at that time. But then COVID happened, and then everything went online. So my preference is in person, and I tell my clients that. And so most of my stuff is in person, but I have a few clients who have either moved or like during the pandemic moved, or during the pandemic someone like was I saw someone who was like 3 hours down south.
Yeah. Right.
So that person obviously is not, after the pandemic, after I opened, they're not going to be able to come see me, but I was still able to see them virtually. Yeah. But I prefer in person.
Yeah. So what year did you open the private practice then?
Probably it would be 2017.
So you met it, I mean, so it's at least established for, you know, almost 3 years by the time the pandemic hits. And it survives.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it flourished in the pandemic.
Yeah, that's incredible. So you were still seeing people in person during the pandemic?
No, I wasn't. It was all virtual, but
you went to, did you go to the office?
No, I didn't.
You just did it at home?
Yeah, I mean, I had a baby there. You know,
that's true, yeah. You got a baby, but like you're paying for this building and not using it.
Well, and then I gave up my sublease about probably, I think, a year into, not even into the, So I was like, because I'm not going there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now where's the practice now?
Well, at that time, where is it now?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So then I have a new space that I rent myself.
So you're considering yourself the practice?
Yeah, I mean, who else is there?
I was thinking the building establishes the practice, but you're right. You were subletting it in the first place.
Yeah.
No reason to hold on to it, at least for those couple of years.
Yeah.
And then you get a new space, reestablish the practice.
Yep.
Wherever you go is the practice.
Right, yeah. So, and I'm literally across the street from where I used to be.
I was say still in Oak Park.
Yes.
What do you call your practice?
Middle Path Psychotherapy.
Middle Path Psychotherapy? Mm-hmm. Where did you come into this name?
So, yeah, that's a good question. So the name comes from, so there's a therapeutic approach called dialectical behavior therapy, DBT for short. And it's a therapy that really resonates for me. It's really founded on a lot of Buddhist philosophy. And so the concept middle path really is about sort of kind of encompassing duality.
Yeah.
And sort of how do you, in DBT, there's a lot of like emotion mind and rational mind. And if you think of them as a Venn diagram, the middle is called wise mind. Right. And that's where we really want people to live, is being able to balance your emotions and your logic together to make decisions.
That's funny. That's what I was curious about, because like I said earlier, I'm going to sound as pretentious as possible, because when you say that middle journey, that's what triggers in my brain, because I've done a lot of research with that sort of thing also, where I'm like, oh, interesting. So then I'm like, oh, that is exactly what you meant.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah. And
that's really cool. Mm-hmm. How do you kind of reconcile the idea of some of those Eastern philosophies versus what is being told to you medically through your profession? Because some of those aren't necessarily aligned.
Correct.
And some might make more sense than others. Do you find yourself kind of leaning one way or the other?
Yeah, I think in graduate school, when I was going to graduate school, a lot of things that were being taught were more westernized, obviously, approaches to psychology. And the dominant at the time was CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy.
Right.
And, you know, I remember going in through school, and we had learned others. So Adler had his own theory, Adlerian theory. So we learned about that as well. And I was always really interested in that. His approach was, if you had to categorize it, it would be psychodynamic therapy, which is the same as Freud.
Right.
So him and Freud started out together. He broke
Right.
apart because a lot of things that Freud
So
said.
there's some problematic things
Yes.
here.
Right. Yes.
Some amazing things, but some
Yeah, I mean, you have to
problematic
credit
things.
where credit is due,
Sure.
right? In some ways, but he broke off because a lot of things he didn't agree upon, and started his own. And he was really considered one of the first community psychologists. So it was really about like if I'm really distilling this down,
Sure,
right?
yeah.
Was that people need each other basically,
Right.
and people who are not in community, who are not with others, are going to be not well. And that stuck with me a lot, and I think I loved a lot of Illyrian theory, but I never considered myself psychodynamic in that way. At that time, I think calling yourself psychodynamic was almost like not cool. Because CBT was really sort of the main, and then...
Well, it sounds like you came up kind of during the first shift, really, because it had been established for a long time.
Yeah.
And then it's not even that it was necessarily being challenged so much as here's an alternative.
Yeah, and so that we call them third wave cognitive behavioral therapies, which would be DBT, and another one is ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, and that's a practice I use a lot as well, which also incorporates a lot of Eastern philosophy into the practice. So they called it third wave because it was... The first wave was behavioral therapy or just pure cognitive therapy. The second wave was cognitive behavioral therapy, and then the third wave were these alternatives, sort of that pulled tenets of that, but also kind of had this more Eastern philosophy approach embedded.
Which doesn't it feel like that makes the most sense too? Is like take what's working and try new things.
Yes,
right?
And that's always been my...
that's how things continue to grow.
Yeah, but I think, when I was going to school, it was a lot of stay in one lane, right? We really had to, I remember even writing applications for internship, and you had to sort of state what your theoretical orientation was. And I always felt limited by that because I didn't really love any just one. I kind of like to pull and choose from what I felt like would work, but that was sort of faux pas at that time. Now it's more acceptable, I think. The term was eclectic or, generalist, but that I remember teachers being like, do not write that on your application. But I think we are getting better, and even now where things are now, I think we're really looking at sort of decolonizing therapy and looking at, if you look at the major people who contributed to psychology, they're mostly white, cis, het men from Europe. Right? And that is not the only way that we can look at people.
Well, you get one control group and you wonder why you're getting one result.
Right. And so a lot of, I think what's really cool now is, and exposing myself to different types of practices and all of these different ways of healing that don't just look like from one type of person coming up with them.
Now, you said an interesting word there, healing. A lot of times in this sort of field and in this kind of practice, it feels like because it's a weekly or however often you're going, but it's an ongoing process, right? Yeah. So how does the healing occur and potentially quote unquote stick? Because it could be like sometimes, especially in like medicine, pharmaceuticals and stuff, it feels like we're built on a sustainability for profit. Do you feel that in your profession? Where it's like, okay, the goal, this is a business, counterproductive to how I feel, but it feels like, especially in there times in certain fields where they're pushing you to, you need this person to come back because it's a paycheck.
Right.
So how do you, again, reconcile that sort of need versus genuinely trying to heal people?
Yeah. It's hard, right? Because I think it's interesting in psychology, there's actually I have seen is like basically get people better and then sort of ship them off. Right. So it's not necessarily want them to come back.
Right.
Of like sort of heal them as fast as possible so you can see another person.
But isn't that seems more dangerous because they're going to fall right back into those things eventually. Right. Like this kind of, depending on how long you're meeting with the people and the whatever intensity you're at, it's going to hold them over for X amount of time. Right.
And, managed care is really the biggest barrier, right? A lot of times I worked at the VA. that was my postdoc, and the system was, and rightfully so, was overwhelmed, I think.
Yeah.
But they were moving to a place where they were like giving, veterans 12 sessions, and then you had to schedule another person behind them. Right. So it was becoming this way, and it was that, to me, that's not the care that I wanted to provide, because 12 sessions is literally the tip of the iceberg for a lot of people, especially veterans.
Yeah.
And
it could take 6 sessions till they even trust you, or will open up.
Maybe even 12, right?
Right, yeah.
Literally, depending on who it is.
Yeah. Especially like what comes with that stereotype also is pretty locked up.
Yeah.
Like it can take a long time to open that up, especially with any kind of new wave approach.
Totally.
Where people are like resistant to it in the first place because they don't know any better.
Right. No. And it's just, the relationship is the most important part of therapy. We've seen that in research. It is probably the biggest factor of change.
Yeah.
Is the relationship between the therapist and the client. So to me, a lot of times, at least my approach is like, that's my main focus, is like, how can these people trust me? Do they feel safe with me? And then I can maybe start to think about what quote unquote interventions am I doing? But like the relationship itself for most of my clients, because most of my clients are usually have been sexually abused in childhood. That's more of my sort of niche specialty. Like trust is the most important thing.
Yeah. Right?
And they've been harmed by someone who that was supposed to take care of them in many ways. And so really the way I see it is a lot of times it's not necessarily an intervention that I learned in school. It's just like the client having a corrective experience with you and seeing this is someone that I can trust, then I can talk about what happened. And that in of itself is healing. Yeah.
I think that's critical also, is because it's really tough. Like I grew up in an abusive house, so it's easy to kind of, you're in this place where somebody tells you they love you, but what they show you is, violence and this whole other flip side thing. And you're like, oh, that must be what that looks like then. And then you go out into the world and with that mindset, and you kind of live that truth, and that sucks because somebody told you the false truth for so long.
Absolutely.
Until somebody can come along and be like, they lied to you basically, or you pick it up on your own, hopefully, before you're too far gone. But yeah, that's a lot. One of the things too is when we came in here, you were admiring the crystals and kind of the stuff, and so you're just starting a crystal journey.
Yeah. So yes, and it's so funny because if you would have asked me 2 to 3 years ago what I thought about crystals, I would have been like, that's nonsense.
Really?
Yeah. I was like, that is so weird. I do not understand why people are into that. It's just a rock. Like, what is going on? And really everything changed for me after in February, I went down to a retreat for psilocybin.
Just this February?
Just this February.
So you're like brand new to this.
I'm brand new, yeah.
Yeah, you are in for a real treat.
Yeah, I've been experiencing the treat
it's so amazing.
Far.
Especially when you are accepting it. So it's like almost like it's speaking to you.
Totally.
Because all that, you can say what you want, but atoms exist. Nobody's going to argue on that.
Yeah.
We also know that they vibrate, which means that everything that exists is made of atoms, which means everything that exists vibrates, which means everything resonates.
Yeah. Everything has energy.
It's all energy, and we're a conduit for that. So anything, it just makes sense to me.
Yeah, no, and even astrology, it was the same way that I really, I was like, oh, people take it from it what they want, like it's so general, which some parts of it is, right? But I remember in my journey, there was a point in time, I cried for like 3 hours at one point, like this deep, like guttural grief. Yeah. And I was like, what is this? And I remember just like, obviously at the time, couldn't really process what was happening. And then it like shifted into this like happy, joyful crying. And in somewhere in that time, I remember thinking and saying aloud, and I don't know how this came to be, but I was like, oh, you fucking Pisces. I'm a Pisces, right? I was like, this is so you. You're so emotional. But I remember in that moment being like, I'm like, what a gift. Yeah. Like, what a gift to be able to feel this sort of feeling and like have this depth of empathy and emotion. And it was that experience in of itself really like made me then start to like think about, right, all of this, and I should say, like, there's so much in that journey, but right, having experienced these like other alternative universe or somewhere bigger than myself, like
Sure.
like really made me start to question, you know, of like what is reality and what is this life, and you know, and sort of I think naturally what came after that. Okay, I have a lot of thoughts that are going through my head. So the person who ended up kind of sitting for me and really taking care of me, I remember in that journey, we were afterwards, we're walking around. I was in Bend, Oregon. No, not Bend. Eugene, Oregon. Yes. It was in Eugene. So if anyone's ever been to Eugene, it's a very interesting place. Very similar to Portland.
Our friend Kristen has family in Eugene.
Oh, yeah. It's such a cute little eclectic place.
Yeah.
And she was from there, and we were on break or something. She's like, I want to take you to this little store that I like. And I'm like, okay, cool. And she went in there, and there was this Oracle card deck that she was like, oh, this is like really beautiful. And I was like, I had never really, I knew what tarot was, but I didn't really know I kind of knew what Oracle cards were at that time. And surprisingly, before my journey, I had a friend who had went through the same experience as I did. He pulled some cards for me, and he sent them to me on the day of my journey. Mm-hmm. And I was like, whoa, this is crazy. And then, right, so this is kind of all how it like started to trickle from like Oracle cards to crystals. There was a crystal shop, and then and astrology, and then I was sort of hooked.
But it all kind of makes sense. So there's this, I love this journey to see it from somebody else, especially somebody that comes from kind of the bookend of it, right?
Oh, yeah.
And the very like nuts and bolts, and then realizing, oh, it's so much bigger.
Yes.
It's so much more even magical, like to use a word that logical people hate.
Yeah.
But especially to see like, it's all, so much of it is based on intentions. Like he pulled cards for you. People would be like, it's just a matter of thinking about somebody. When you think about somebody, you're projecting a certain energy and what they mean to you. So so to pull those cards is really quite easy, and it can be haunting in the best way when you see the results and you're like, wow, okay, this is wild.
Like it was.
I would have loved to have been with you then, especially because this all happened so fast.
Yeah. To
go then to a crystal shop after experiencing the main thing and then these sub parts, and to see what called to you when you got to the crystal shop. Because something's going to pull you in for sure. Yep. Did you leave with a crystal that day?
I did. I remember which one it was at the time because I was so, it was so new to me. But it was like a geode of some kind. I remember just it looked so beautiful. And I actually bought a crystal oracle card deck from that store.
Very cool.
Yeah, because it really like some of it spoke to me, and I mean I'm wearing crystals all over today. So like moss agate is probably one of my favorite crystals. It was the one that I was like super drawn to, which knowing me now like makes a lot of sense. And like it's so interesting because I'm like learning more about myself through this process, and like with astrology and like looking more into astrology, not just your sun sign but your moon sign and your ascending sign. And I was like,
well, every planet, like when you started pulling the curtain back, it's incredible. That's why like when somebody's like, yes, you know, whatever is my sun sign, but like I don't really have. I'm like, okay, but what's your ascendant? What's the rest of the planetary positions? Where's your moon? And people are like, what? And I'm like, so you don't know what you're talking about in the first place,
right? You know, and I was like, and I really relate to Pisces, most of things that are Pisces, and then I learned that my moon sign was Taurus, and I was like, yes, that makes sense, and that my ascending sign is Scorpio. Again, makes sense. Right, but like now I hear that, and like I said, literally a year ago you could have told me this and I would have been like, you are talking gibberish, like what?
And not for nothing, it can be tough to kind of balance those two spots because of what you do is very book based.
Yeah, it can be very science heavy.
Right, and like even like to me, the things we just mentioned partner with all of existence effortlessly. Yeah. It's just a matter of how your brain functions.
Totally.
So to me, it makes sense, and I think it fuels every aspect of life, and can make it easier to understand or easier to deal with and stuff like that. Like, My first, I've got a fist-sized piece of rose quartz that I absolutely love, like just because most of my things are heart-based.
Yeah.
Like I'm a very loving person and caring person, but I'm also like a very guarded and broken person.
Yeah. What's your sign?
I'm an Aries.
Oh, my husband's an Aries.
Yeah, but my rising sign is Taurus.
Mm.
So it's like it's such an interesting combination
Yeah.
of like this outgoing guy who also wants to be left alone and stay inside.
Yes.
It's tough to balance those two things also. Now the retreat you're talking about here in Oregon.
Yeah.
This is your because we were going to record months ago, but you were working on something.
Yes. Yes.
And this is you went to a retreat where this is your first experience with psilocybin.
Yes. Yes. So, I guess, do you want me to kind of go from a little bit from the beginning of
Yes,
how I got there?
please.
Okay. So how I got into psychedelics. Pre-pandemic, I had clients, a few clients come in starting to tell me about doing ketamine infusions.
Yeah. So you had never done stuff. Sorry, just an addendum. You had never done some of this before. Like when we were coming up and we were getting a little wild.
Yep.
You never ventured into that sort of thing.
No, it scared me.
Really?
I was really brought up, so right, having immigrant parents,
Sure.
right?
Not wanting to get in trouble.
Yeah, there and a lot of it was, war on drugs and
Yeah.
just say no. Like I was in a parade with a Dare shirt on.
Right.
Right? Like, I mean, my
You
parents...
took your oath very seriously.
Yes, right? And my parents were very scared of all of that. Both of my parents have never smoked weed.
Yeah.
Ever.
Right.
And my parents grew up in that time period.
Right.
But like from the cultures that they came from, and they were very religious.
Right.
That was not acceptable.
But I think it's also unfortunate the damage has already been done where they group so many things into one drug war.
Yep.
Where you're like, okay, marijuana is like, we're still seeing like, okay, nobody cares.
Yep.
We're still at the infancy even of psilocybin being like, this is actually really, really beneficial and helpful. Especially like if you're just doing something like microdosing, this is going to help you in so many ways that people, but it's still a class X felony.
Yes. So we're trying to get that rescheduled. So right now, obviously, MDMA is in the process of getting FDA approval for PTSD. And while MDMA is in a traditional psychedelic, right, it still has properties. And I mean, the research is amazing on it. So that should if all things go according to plan, it should be this August that FDA approves it as a treatment for PTSD, and then it will be rescheduled by the DEA.
Now that doesn't necessarily mean recreational use. That's
correct.
Still...
It's like medicinal, kind of similar to cannabis, but not because cannabis isn't federally rescheduled.
Right.
It's statewide, right? So, but this would happen on a statewide level, but it would be for medical use only, so you'd have to go to a doctor.
It's still an amazing step in like getting people the help they need. 100%. I didn't mean to derail you. So your personal journey.
Yeah. So no, I had never had any of this experience before, and people coming in talking about ketamine, and I was like, what is this? And I happened to, my first client who came in, she was seeing a guy who was an ER doctor, and he had a practice ketamine clinic right down the street from me. And she's like, I'm doing this ketamine treatment for like my depression, and she felt like it was really helping. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And then I had another client come in talking about it. And then it kind of just started to be a thing that I was seeing. And a lot of my clients were getting a ton of benefit from it. And I was like, this is interesting. So then I kind of started talking to him about it and sending some more of my clients over there. And so that's kind of where the interest started.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting there and, some of my clients would come in and talk about these sessions, the infusions that they had. And I was like, it's like I couldn't connect with it, right? I didn't understand. Like they were talking about it, but it could be like similar to someone telling you about their LSD experience, right? If you've never done LSD, like you'd be like, what is going on there? Or, psilocybin, same thing, mushrooms, like someone telling you about their journey. You're like, what? Until you actually experience it.
Right.
Right?
It does click though. Like once you experience it, you're like, I get it.
Yes.
Like I feel like I've just been let in the club.
Totally. Right. And so I had said I need to have my own experience. So I was able to get my own experience, and I was
Did that create a lot of anxiety, or were you ready to figure
No, I was scared.
Yeah.
I was definitely scared.
Because I feel like in this sort of thing, that's gonna bleed into your experience.
Mhm.
If you, but like obviously you're in a controlled group and like very like a group in general.
Yeah.
So I remember the first time I did them. There's this moment when you eat a bunch of mushrooms, and you're like, "Shit, I'm in this now."
Yep.
Because it takes up to a half hour for them to take effect,
Yep.
and there's that anxiety of like, I just did that.
And you
Now
can't
whatever
go back.
happens, I can't stop
You
it.
cannot go back. I know the actual cool thing about ketamine is there's ways to kind of dampen, right? Because in an infusion, you can push something else that helps
Sure.
people if they're, getting really
Yeah.
anxious or something like that. But yeah, with traditional psychedelics, once
Right.
it's in your body, there's no turning back, right? But ketamine, obviously, like, and I said, I had never really done anything like that. So I was definitely nervous. But the doctor who did it for me was amazing, and I felt comfortable with him. And it was just this, I had never experienced anything like that in my life.
Yeah.
And then, so from there, I started being more interested in learning that there's something called ketamine assisted therapy. And I was like, what's that? And so one thing kind of led to another, and I found this training for psychedelic assisted therapy through the place it's called Integrative Psychiatry Institute. It's an online school.
Awesome.
And you get trained in ketamine, psilocybin, and MDMA assisted therapy. It's a 9-month-long program. So I signed up, and I just finished a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. So now is that something you can bring into your practice?
Mm-hmm.
Even though it's still Class X felon, it's not rescheduled yet.
So yes, so technically no, I can't
Okay.
do psilocybin.
But come August, if everything
mhm.
happens, you have the whatever it's called, prerequisite to be able to subscribe, that sort of thing.
So I wouldn't prescribe. I would have still. It's still like right now. Even like I could do ketamine assisted therapy right now.
Yeah.
Right, with my training, but the ketamine has to come from an MD. Right.
Okay.
So it's basically you have to partner. There's a couple different ways. So ketamine comes in a couple different forms.
So you're not facilitating it. You just can write the recommendation and then have to get with the doctor.
Not necessarily. So like I said, you could do ketamine intravenously, intermuscularly, sublingually, or intranasally. So there's 4 routes of administration for ketamine.
Intranasally?
Yes.
Is that snorting it?
It is like a spray.
Still,
And
that
it is
sounds like
called-
the worst way.
Well, what's interesting is it's called Spravato, and it is the only FDA-approved route of administration
Of
for
course it
ketamine.
is. They're laughing somewhere.
Oh yeah.
Bogus.
Yeah. So yes. So that people they again need an MD, and so when ketamine I think first came out, and ketamine is not a new drug, right?
Right.
It's a tranquilizer, an
Yeah.
anesthetic. It's been used. It's still used today all the time in ERs. For kids even too, if they have a laceration they need to fix. It sort of kind of sedates people in this way.
Yeah.
So very safe. It's not,
Well, that's not necessarily psychoactive.
So it's sometimes classified as a dissociative amnestic. So it has a dissociative quality.
Yeah.
It's not hallucinogenic
Right.
like psilocybin or LSD, but it has interesting properties where there's, like when I have done it, I have had some visuals, and it's just a different experience. So it has these qualities, a lot of out of body sort of feeling.
So you've done the ketamine, but you've also done the psilocybin.
Yes.
Do you find that it's a whole different world, or
100%.
Okay, 'cause let's say like everybody has a different experience, but like doing the psilocybin, I've never felt like I've always had issues like whatever however we're broken,
Yeah.
but like doing that and then like kind of laying there just staring at the sky. I felt like there wasn't a speck of dust out of place in the universe. Like everything felt so perfect, and it's like you feel that connection to all of existence.
Yeah.
That can you can ride that for up to 3 to 6 months.
Sure.
Like depending on what's going on in your life.
Yeah.
Did you have anything like that as well, or was it different for you?
With psilocybin, or
Yeah,
yeah.
with either really.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to see what because I've never done ketamine, so I don't know
Yeah.
what the difference is.
Yeah. So with the ketamine, so I've done 2 different ways of ketamine. I've done the IV, and then I've done intermuscular through my program. So through the IPI program, part of our training is this experiential weekend where you go to Boulder. And we get IM ketamine, but the way it's facilitated, we're paired into triads.
Yeah.
So it's like a training experience to learn how to receive ketamine, and two, how to be a guide or, the therapist in that setting, sitting for someone. And then there's a therapist, a client, and an observer. But we're all we're all like therapists or nurse practitioners or MDs getting trained in psychedelic assisted therapy.
Right.
So what we do is we all rotate those roles. So each one of us is the client at some point, the therapist at some point, and the observer at some point. And that's delivered intermuscularly, but that's more to learn ketamine assisted psychotherapy, like to learn what it's like to be the therapist in that role.
Yeah.
Versus like when I did the IV, it was more for educational understanding. So no one was there with me. Like they inject.
I wish I could do drugs and be like, this is for educational purposes.
It's an interesting place to be. It's pretty, But what I will say, like I think what some of the misconception is, like even when I tell people that I have done psilocybin, is they think it's right. I took it and walked out in the woods and or whatever, and it's like no. The way I did it, again, is in a very therapeutic container.
Right.
A very intentional container.
Yeah.
A very internal container, which looks very different. And I think both have their utility.
Sure.
Right? I think recreational use of mushrooms are absolutely wonderful for people. Right? And I think this therapeutic way of using them is super powerful.
Yeah.
And I think it's a completely different experience.
You took a lot. You said like 3 grams.
Yeah, so...
Because usually I feel like in like day-to-day psychology, you'd probably put somebody on like a microdose.
Sure.
Like just like, especially like for PTSD or for depression and stuff like that, it really can like a nice microdose that can kind of even you out without making you feel like you would feel on certain drugs, like an antidepressant. It doesn't have those side effects.
Right. Yeah. So microdosing, we could probably spend a whole nother time on microdosing or just all these, because it's interesting, there's been such a popularity boom about, right? And people are saying it's a psychedelic renaissance. They're kind of coming back, right? Which is really cool because I think, right, I have no idea why psilocybin is scheduled. I think it's 1 or 2. It's mind-blowing to me, right?
Anything that's hallucinogenic is class X.
Yeah, and I'm just like, what is the point of this? Like, these are actually not dangerous compared to heroin. Right? Yeah. Like, compared to cocaine, like, these are the things that are killing people.
We're still in a fentanyl crisis.
Right, exactly. And, like, you cannot overdose on psilocybin. So it is actually one of the most...
Is that true?
Yes, that is true.
So that's, because in, like, anything, there's horror stories out there. But I feel like you're not getting the whole story.
Correct.
Because usually when drugs are being passed around, sometimes it's in a sleazy setting.
Sure.
Sometimes things are messed with. Or sometimes you're doing other things and mixing them with the psilocybin.
Correct.
And that's why you're having a quote-unquote bad trip or you're getting messed up. Like, cause I agree. Like, well, I don't agree. It's a fact.
Yes. I will say I'm 99% sure that if you're just... it's a mushroom. Like,
right.
It grows from the ground.
Literally, it's literally food poisoning.
Yeah.
So like the worst that's going to happen is you're going to throw up.
Yes. But no, you won't die. I mean, I guess I'll say this. Sure. Here's what I'll say about it is that with a normal, healthy adult doing that, the likelihood is almost none.
Yeah.
Of course, right, there are crazy things that happen.
There's a million factors. Like, I don't want to blanket somebody else that has and be like, oh, we misspoke.
Yes.
Like, anything could happen.
Yes,
sure.
So this is not absolutely you need to consult with a doctor before you're doing this.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of pre-existing conditions that could. So it's not what I'm trying to say is not the mushroom itself.
Right.
It could be an underlying condition that you have. Right. Usually
reaction.
cardiovascular issues
Sure.
that would be the cause of something bad happening, but not the mushroom itself.
Right. Not the psilocybin for sure.
Yes.
That makes a lot of sense. I just like talking about it.
Yeah,
I'd be curious. So you've never done it outside of this intentional space? Because like I said, I was lucky enough that a group of us went up to our friend Kate's. She had a place in Michigan, so and it was right backed up to a forest, huge deck with a pool or a patio with a pool. Like, I laid out there and just stared at the sky for like 7 hours. I remember I felt like such an asshole because like I just kept saying dumb shit. Like somebody asked me a question, I'd be like, all of it, man.
Yeah.
I can just see all of it.
Yeah.
But I also felt like, and only while I was doing it, that I felt like I understood sacred geometry, and I could see the shapes in the sky and like the tree. Like I can see the geometry that makes up everything,
Yeah.
and like and then the primary colors and stuff, and how it all kind of forms together. Do you, having the more of a controlled experience? Do you experience anything like that?
Probably not because we're inside.
Right.
Right. But I will say at one point during the experience, like I said, mostly when I was doing it, I had eye shades on for majority of the time, or my eyes were closed. So it was all internal, right?
Yeah.
But there was a point in time when I had to get up and use the bathroom, and that's when I saw all the visuals.
Yeah.
Right. And I was like, whoa, like this is insane. Yeah. Like, you know, so I would like to try it, and again, where I could have it in like an outdoor setting.
Yeah.
Because, you know, a lot of people are like, that's the best part. For me, it was, and a lot of it was because I have pretty bad motion sickness. So I remember looking at the floor and I was like, oh my God, it looks like lava. Like it's all moving, and like, right, everything is like moving and breathing and
like pulsate. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was, I think, and I remember just being like, I need to go back to like where I was. But yeah, the visuals are definitely all there, even when your eyes are closed.
Yeah.
So
it's crazy how they show up when your eyes are closed.
Yes.
Yeah, and I feel like, and that again, that's when you take like an X amount, and that's different for everybody and stuff like that. Usually with the microdosing, you don't get the visuals.
Right.
You just get that. It's such a small amount that you're just getting that feeling of everything feels connected, and I'm a part of it, as opposed to like how a lot of us normally feel like we're outside of it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because technically, from a technical point of view, microdosing, you shouldn't feel anything. Yeah. Right? Like you shouldn't feel any sort of, you know, it depends on the person, but it should be 100 to 200 milligrams. So that would be like 1 to 2 grams. Or no. I'm thinking no milligrams, is it? I'll look it up. But it's a very, very small amount, right? Yeah. And so I think because even my clients coming in talking about microdosing, you know, and the thing is, to be quite frank, there isn't actually a ton of good, consistent research on microdosing.
Well, it's still new, right?
It's still new.
Still in its infancy.
So, but I will tell you, a lot of anecdotally, people are saying that it's working for them.
And that's the thing, is like, these are people that are medicating themselves and saying, this is my results personally, which is 100% grain of salt.
Sure. The only thing that is the question, right, when we think about, is it really psilocybin is placebo effect. Right. So this is why we need more studies.
Because if you know how it feels to take a bunch or any, and then you're taking a much smaller amount, did you just kind of balance yourself out in your brain, or did you actually chemically?
Sure. And like right now I'm doing a microdosing protocol, which is the Paul Stamets stack. So what that is like I said, when you do microdosing, if you're going to do it, you have to do it in a structured way. Yeah. Right? It's not just, I mean, some people do it differently. I shouldn't say you have to do it, but when I think about how it's supposed to be therapeutic, right? It's a very, like, there are protocols out there. So Paul Stamets has one, and James Fatima has another one.
Well, I feel like for results, you need a certain amount of consistency, which has to be certainly regulated a certain way.
Right. And so his stack looks like, it's lion's mane, niacin, and psilocybin, and you go 4 days on, 3 days off, for about, I think it's like 4 weeks. So I am like in the tail end of that right now, and I'm doing about 200 milligrams of mushrooms, and right now it's hard for me to know if I am like noticing an effect or not. And it's interesting to me because I'm like, maybe I need a higher dose. Yeah. Right? And potentially thinking maybe I need a higher dose because I've already had such a very large dose. So yeah, I guess the jury's out still a little bit. But
how did you start with such a high dose?
For
especially like with the anxiety kind of built into it, Because like my first time too, I took what some would call a heroic amount.
Which is like 5 grams or above is
Yeah.
considered heroic.
Well, I accidentally smoked like 3 joints that night also, which I do not like.
Yeah, and that's interesting. The combination of the two is
Yeah.
also very interesting.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff coming out about how to use both together.
I don't like smoking things because it bothers my lungs.
Sure.
In general, like I don't, you should do anything you want to do. But
Yeah.
as long as you're not hurting somebody else.
Yeah.
I just would have liked to. I think that scenario. I think it intensified what I was going through a lot, and that's at least I needed that then, because man, I rode that for a long time. I don't know if you remember our friend Dan T. He got stuck in a mirror that night.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's my number one thing. Do not look in the mirror. That's and I remember when I went to the bathroom, I was like, I am not looking in the mirror.
Yeah.
Like I knew not to do that. Because even looking at other people's faces was really weird.
Yeah.
Everyone looks very old. And
You feel like it's like not in a mean way, but it's almost like you're seeing them for the first time, and like what we all actually look like behind all the facades we put on.
Yes. Yes. So yes, I'm like, don't look in the mirror. Don't look in the mirror.
I don't need that truth.
No, I'm like, for my first time, let me just not. I don't need to like go to ego death.
Yeah. Now on the flip side, I was held hostage by my vacuum cleaner once.
You know, that can happen.
Well, I did some on my own, and I was laying on my couch. I was just finished vacuuming,
Yeah.
and I was like laying there. And when I opened my eyes, the vacuum just looked like a person, and like almost like a monster.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh no! And I closed my eyes real quick. And when I opened them again, it was just staring at me, and I'm like, I yelled to my vacuum cleaner,
I bet.
I'm not even trying to go anywhere. Just leave me alone.
I love it.
But it never felt threatening. And that's the kind of
Sure.
thing, like, even the first big dose, like, I would see certain images in the sky, and even some of them were, like, unpleasant or, like, death adjacent, but nothing felt harmful or negative at all. It all just felt so, like, correct.
Yeah, and I mean, what I tell people, I think a lot of people think about like what bad trips or whatever, and in the sort of therapeutic space, we tend to say there is no such thing as a bad trip.
Right.
We talk about it as a challenging experience, but that anything that the medicine is bringing to you is something you need to see, and it might be something you're not ready to see.
Right.
But it doesn't mean it's a bad experience. It might be hard, right? But there's something there for you.
You find that that's incredibly related to psychology as a whole.
Yeah.
Of like talking to somebody, your job is to slowly kind of bring those things to the surface,
Right.
And kind of push here and there and prod to see what they're ready to handle and when.
100%.
So it's like a natural marriage, those two.
Totally. And that's why, like, when I got into this, and some of the reason I became so interested was because I think talk therapy only does so much, right? I think that's only one channel that we're used to. And a lot of talk therapy is cognitive, right? Of course, we have more somatic-based things, and I think those are wonderful and great, but there's just so many planes to a person, different aspects of them.
I still think it's hard for a lot of people to open up or feel safe.
Absolutely.
Especially in your particular field where they're already violated in a way that they're like shutting themselves down.
100%.
It can be really hard to talk somebody through that to want to open up again.
Yeah. And I think, especially with MDMA, the sort of cool thing about MDMA is it's a heart opener, right? And this is why it's so great for PTSD, because people are able to open up and feel safe in talking about those really scary things that happen to them, because it sort of breaks down that sort of wall, and it allows people to really access that sort of core sense of self and really that inner healer that is present in all of us.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I feel like we've covered your life. Like, we spent a lot of time on psychology, which, like, secretly is what I wanted to talk about the most.
Yeah.
Just because I find it fascinating. I am so behind how it's evolving.
Yeah.
So it's awesome to talk about it. Do you, like, obviously you did all the stuff, so the goal is to put these things into your practice.
Yes.
Now, right now, your practice is still just you, right?
Yeah, just me.
Do you plan on growing that, or do you have ideas to grow it, or are you just like, this, I'm content?
Yeah, I did. Probably about a year ago, I had thoughts of wanting to expand and hire people. And I kind of started delving into that space, and it just, in going through it and trying to hire people and thinking about, contracting people versus using them as an employer. Like there was a whole nother business aspect of stuff that I was just like not interested in doing and was super overwhelming that I kind of was like, no, this is not it for me, you know? And so I just decided to like sublease my office space for like more additional income because I had bought a bigger space with the intent of hiring and it just didn't feel right to me. You know, I felt like either too much liability or like it just wasn't my jam, you know? And so I sort of pivoted and have been doing, you know, the solo work, obviously. So yeah, I don't see myself like growing my practice, but I see myself doing a lot more different things in my own practice. So psychedelics was just for me another tool,
right?
You know, to have for my clients, you know, because a lot of times people come in and they get stuck, right? It doesn't matter how good of a therapist you are. Sometimes you can only take people so far, right? And what the cool thing about psychedelics is it helps some people get past that.
Right.
You know, and so to me, it's another what we call tool in my toolbox.
Right. Which is important. I mean, if you just bring a hammer and you've got to, you know, drill holes.
Exactly. Right? It won't work.
So it's definitely nice to have. You want as many tools as you can.
Yes.
I think that makes sense. Do you only have one kid?
Yep, only one.
Okay, great. That checks out.
Yeah. just I'm an only child and you know.
So you wanted them to suffer also.
I didn't suffer. That's what's funny. Like I loved being an only child.
You've definitely avoided like probably almost all stereotypes and tropes, right?
No, definitely not. You know, myself?
Yeah.
Oh no, I'm totally
selfish.
I wouldn't call myself selfish.
Well, of course you wouldn't.
I do one of the most selfless jobs that there is, right?
You just spent all this time talking about how wonderful you are. Now let me tell you the truth.
Yeah, I will say I'm like sort of what I think when I think about like I have a hard time sharing.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so I'm very territorial over things. Like, like if I order, like, this is a sort of running joke with me and my husband. If I order something or buy something like food related and he like eats it or wants to eat it, I become like, that's my food. He's like, this is our food. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. That's funny because you're an only child and feel that way. I feel that way because I'm the middle child.
Interesting.
Yeah, because I'm like, I hate sharing. And I'm like, I will get you whatever you want.
Yeah.
This is mine.
Totally. Probably because you've had to share all of these things.
Right. You get the hand-me-downs from your older brother.
Yep.
Your stuff's taken away and given to the younger one at some point. Like, it's, you know, you don't feel like you have anything.
Totally.
Yeah. I'd be curious to explore the more similar parallels of the middle child versus the only child.
Yeah. So Adler talked a lot about birth order. That was another interesting thing in my training. So he did a lot on birth order and looking at, right, the styles of how people are. And it's pretty cool.
It's I'd be curious to learn stuff like that just because it's a little more muddy, my personal story, because my brother has a different mom. So he's technically my stepbrother, but he's always been my brother. So I'm my mom's firstborn, but I'm my dad's middle son. So it's like, and my sister and I are related, you know, by blood, and my brother is like a half brother. Like, I'd be curious to see what every little piece plays, and like, and how that's manifesting and showing up over my life.
Totally, because you know, there's a lot of, you know, like you said, you sort of have dual roles, right? Where you're a firstborn child and a middle child, right? And like sometimes like something that can also where there's a large age gap between siblings.
My brother's 8 years older than me. And 10 years older than my sister. Yeah.
So like sometimes like my sister-in-law is 10 years younger than my husband. And so in many ways, she's kind of, even though she's the baby, there was also it's sort of like an only child thing too, right? Yeah. Where, because she grew up in that way and siblings were much older.
Yeah.
So it's really fascinating to sort of think about.
That is interesting. Especially too, because my brother's mom back in the day, like lived in Oklahoma. So he would always leave for the summer. So I would basically be the oldest for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's wild.
So yeah, you think about like maybe that's where some of the, you know, even some of that not sharing or not wanting to share could have been like some oldest stuff in there too.
Yeah, but I also feel like too, that's why I feel like I got it the worst from my dad because I was his middle child. So I, like, basically the throwaway. Like, you're not the
Yeah.
first son and you're not the baby girl.
Right.
Like, not that he was particularly nice to them.
Yeah.
But, like, it's easy to just kind of beat this one up.
Sure, but and it is even like gender, right?
Yeah.
Because that's another thing. Like like even my sister-in-law, she's the only girl, right? So she's the only girl, but so that makes it like even though you're out of 3, you're the only girl,
Yeah.
right? So like even gender can sort of play into that of like how it's very interesting and like complicated.
I do find that stuff fascinating, especially because it's all, like, subconscious.
Yeah,
Like, I still don't think my dad was ever, like, consciously making these decisions.
likely not.
This is just what made sense to him in these moments.
Yeah,
It's just unfortunate that that's where his brain goes.
Yeah.
But that goes back to where he came from also, right? Like,
totally.
so it's easy to kind of be like, it's irrelevant. No, he's dead. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean but like, oh yeah, I mean upbringing is so, and attachment is like, again, that's a whole nother podcast too, of like
Yeah.
thinking about.
I would love
all
to
of that.
talk to you about attachment and stuff like that, especially knowing that you're bringing a lot of Eastern philosophy, because it's something that I absolutely love, and the idea of attachment I feel like is often, not perverted, but like it isn't, I feel like, processed correctly as far
Yeah.
as the idea. Same with like when people say, "Oh, that's karma." It's such a gross misunderstanding of what karma is.
Totally.
Like, it really, especially when you do understand it, and you're like, "Can you not say stuff like that?" Because you don't know what you're talking about.
Totally. I mean, 100%. I feel like that's with a lot of things,
Yeah.
right? People just misgeneralize all of these things.
Yeah.
And
Well, somehow it becomes part of the zeitgeist,
yep.
and we're supposed to just accept it. Like, obviously, we're not going to change all of society's ideals, but
Right.
it's frustrating when you know. It's like, it goes back to one of my pet peeves is assume and presume, and it's one that we've given up on. Even the dictionary has given up on it
Yep.
because of a stupid phrase. If when you assume, you make an ass out of me, and you'll be like, okay, well, that's the wrong word.
Right.
The word is presume. Pre, as in you're assuming before you assume.
Right.
And assume means to take the form of something, but you just interchange them like a dick.
I love that. I've never even thought of that. That's hilarious. Yeah, and I mean, I think it's, even in my profession, a lot of like my pet peeve is like the sort of I remember I saw this mug one time that said like, don't confuse my doctoral degree with your Google search.
Yeah.
Right? But in today's day and age, while I love that mental health is becoming so much more talked about and like destigmatized, unfortunately there's a lot of misinformation out on the internet and social media, like people claiming that they have all these diagnoses or saying this is what this is, and it's just like it's a weird time.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm like, listen, I think there's a lot of over pathologizing of people. But I really think, kind of going back to where we started, right? It's people wanting to feel connected.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. And they're trauma bonding, essentially,
Yes.
which is incredibly dangerous.
Yes.
But like, I one of the particular diagnosis that I feel like is misused a lot is bipolar. Particularly that one, because I feel like anybody that feels any kind of way is like, oh yeah, I'm bipolar, or the doctor was throwing at them, you're probably bipolar.
Yep.
And it's like, well, sometimes things happen and it changes your mood. Like that's a lot. It doesn't mean you have a disease or a sickness,
Right.
or a mental health issue.
Right.
It just means that something affected you,
Exactly.
and that's okay.
Right.
But there's a lot more to being bipolar than just, oh, now I'm mad or now I'm sad.
Totally. And, I feel like, again, why I sort of resist the urge and diagnosis, like, especially when we talk about PTSD, right? PTSD is, and it's hard to call it a diagnosis because it's a normal reaction to something abnormal that happened to someone.
Something so traumatic that it's affecting you.
Exactly. Like, that's not a problem, like, right? And so this is where we kind of think about people's reactions to things in their life. Like, that's not a disorder.
Right. I feel like that particular disorder has changed a lot over the last 80 years.
Yeah.
Because I read there used to be called shell shock.
Uh-huh.
And it's literally like every 20 years they change what it's called.
Yeah.
Which I feel like we're in the midst of needing to change it again.
They changed it for this most recent edition of the DSM-5, but they did, and they added some criteria that they hadn't before. The biggest push that a lot of us want is a diagnosis for complex PTSD. which is not in DSM-5, but it is in ICD-11, which is the International Classification of Disorders. It's
Is
more
that
of
just
the medical.
another level then?
Yeah,
so
it's more.
PTSD, complex PTSD?
Yeah, complex PTSD is yes, usually when we see it's a more oh man, I could spend another whole like I've taught a whole class.
You should have your own podcast.
Right? I would love that.
You can.
It's just the time. Oh man, I'm involved in so many different organizations and with my private practice and a son.
Yeah.
So many things I want to do. Maybe one day.
1 hour a week.
You know, but yeah, it's just more of a people who have a like usually typically what we see is people who've been have multiple traumas over time, and so right complex events lead to complex interactions.
Right. So you're saying basically more than like a stereotypical, because PTSD could happen with one traumatic experience.
Yes.
So you're saying somebody that's kind of had it like compounded.
Correct.
It keeps like happening over and over again, or something different.
Yes.
Just on the same level.
Yeah. So it would be something like an easy example for people to understand would be someone who was molested growing up multiple times over their lifetime.
That or like somebody that's gone to war, and you did a whole 6-month tour, and you could have a few bad days.
Sure, or it could even be, let's say someone had I don't want to say bad or negative experience in childhood, and I want to also like clarify for people that I think a lot of people equate like abuse as like sexual or physical violence,
right.
But emotional and psychological abuse are, if not the same, if not worse, for people. So just like having a parent who's emotionally unavailable,
right.
Who's abusive like emotionally, we see the same symptoms of
gaslighting, stuff like that too.
All of that, right? Or just like neglect.
Yeah.
Right.
What I think it's easy to miss neglect because you think of neglect as almost like being downright abandoned, and it's so much subtler than that.
Yes.
That you don't even really think about it. Like even just a kid who's just like, yeah, my parents were, cooking or off doing something, and I was just sitting in front of the TV for hours a day.
Yep.
Like, or even like latchkey kids. That's how they grew up. They were very neglected.
100%. And I can tell you, so many of my clients will come in and be like, well, my parents never hit me, or, I was never sexually abused, and I'm like, that doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
And then you get into like the sort of nuance in the dynamic between the caregiver and the child.
Yeah.
And that's where you find all of it.
Right. Do you find though, there's like when I used to do the trauma recovery too, and like when you kind of can find these things hidden in there as you're talking about them or exploring, through doing it, and eventually if they're open to the work, eventually the lights come back on.
Yeah.
And there's these incredible moments, or they'll see these aha moments in their brain where you're like, that's what the whole point of all of this is, to get these lights back on and to see your brain piecing it together. Because like I don't mean to put myself in your group by any means, but you're just a facilitator, really.
100%.
Like you're just here to guide you to where you're already, where you're going and where you need to be. I'm just here to help you get there. And
that's what I say to my clients. I go, I'm just your tour guide, but you're doing the hard work. This is all inner, like, right? And a lot of my approach and other approaches believe in the inner wisdom of a person. Sometimes you just get lost, right? And I'm just helping you sort of, sometimes I talk about it as I'm a person with my own struggles, right? I'm not this person who's got it all together. I work on my own things and my own therapy, right? And it's more of like, I'm climbing this mountain and you're climbing this mountain, right? We're still working on our shit together. But where I am, I just have a different vantage point of where you are. And I can help you in that way. But that doesn't mean I don't have my own stuff. I like to humanize for people. Like, I hate the power differential in therapy, right? I'm just the same human as you. I just went to school for this.
I think that some people like that dynamic of you're the therapist. Personally, I'd rather we're on the same level. I just, like you said, I have a toolbox. Yep. And that's really the only difference, because I'm always big on perspective. Yep. That's why I've always liked to talk to people in general. Is like, that's why I'm drawn. I don't like school and education. Like, it annoys the living hell out of me. And having to go through all the education stuff bothers me. But I have a natural knack for this sort of thing, where I just like to sit and talk to people, and I can guide them where they need to go, and I can dig into what needs to be dug into, and feel like I'm helping. But I also don't want to hurt anybody, so I don't do it like for real.
Sure.
Because you could 100% do just as much damage.
Sure.
But yeah, I don't know, man. It's just nice to help people in that way. It's very rewarding.
I mean,
Especially
I love my
like
job.
when you kind of brush along a path of somebody that like is walking a similar path that you've walked or seen, and it's just heart wrenching in the first place, and you have to stay professional, and then see them start getting through it, and you're like, this is why it should be free.
Totally. And yeah, I have one of the best jobs, one of the hardest jobs, I will say, but one of the most gratifying and rewarding
That's
jobs.
what I was going to ask too, is kind of like an after, or not an afterthought, but almost a kibosh.
Yeah.
Is especially because you're focused on what you're focused on, like trauma and stuff like that. How hard is it, and how do you deal with not carrying it with you?
Well, my first answer is you do carry it with you.
Right.
There's no way not to. I don't know of anyone who doesn't. I mean, the stories that I've heard are some of the worst things that I've ever heard in my life that humans do to other humans.
It almost is like you wouldn't have the emotional wherewithal to be in this position if you weren't in some way taking it with you.
Yeah.
Because that's just empathy, right?
Totally. And I think it is the hardest part is, like people are like, ask that question all the time, and I'm like, I do take it with me all the time. It has affected many parts of my life.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know how it wouldn't.
Right. That's what makes me excited that you're slowly getting into the crystals, and because like these are not for nothing. As you'll learn, these are protection. These absorb energy. These need to be cleansed.
Yeah.
Just like your space, you can't see it, but over here on Dr. Melissa's desk, she's got some sage for scrubbing and for emotionally clearing the space and things like
100%.
that. Yeah. Have you dabbled in any of that, or is that stuff you're slowly getting into?
Slowly. I have some sage at my house and some Palo Santo. So again, it's like I'm slowly dipping my toe in.
So up until now, how have you kind of done that?
My own therapy.
I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, and or just like taking care of myself and like being. But I will say this, I definitely have gotten numb to a lot of things.
Yeah.
Right. It's hard not to. Once you hear this stuff over and over and over again. But it's a lot of just like checking myself.
Yeah.
And I think getting into psychedelics, because as a therapist, it is really hard to sometimes engage in therapy and to find the right therapist for yourself.
Yeah.
So psychedelics has helped me really like in my psilocybin journey, right? And a lot of people talk about this. It's like years worth of therapy in like one dose.
Yeah.
But it's like unpacking all of that and really, right? So really just checking myself.
Yeah.
And like really learning more about myself.
Do you enjoy that part?
Yeah.
That's my favorite, is to kind of get all the information at once and then be like, all right, let's work through this now over the next couple of weeks.
Well, and that's what integration is all about. And I tell people, psychedelics, that's the healing part. It's not the mushroom per se.
Right.
It's what you do with that information and how you, what we call, integrate it into your life.
Yeah.
So people can have, and the thing is, it's not that I think psychology or anything, let me say, it's psychedelic assisted therapy.
Sure.
Right? So that the psychedelics are assisting the therapy.
It's another tool, like we keep talking about.
Right. And
except this tool is mostly used for data gathering.
Well, right, because some people will go and they'll have these big experiences on psilocybin, LSD by themselves, and what ends up happening is then they're lost. They don't know what to do with that.
It can be overwhelming. For
yes,
sure.
because
I wonder if that also plays into some of those quote unquote bad trips that people might have had.
Yep.
It's just being overwhelmed by like the truth.
Yep.
Especially that your subconscious has been trying to protect you from for so 100%. Long.
100%. And I personally, like from my own experiences, I couldn't imagine doing what I did by myself. Yeah. I needed to hold someone's hand like the entire time. I really needed someone there. And so, what I tell people, like for people to know is that like these are very powerful medicines, right? And historically, they were never intended to be used alone. Shamans used these in practice.
There was a particular person.
Always someone with
that was an quote unquote expert in it that would guide you, a spirit guide also. Yeah.
Yes, a guide, a shaman, right? They're not that you can't do them alone, but right, to think of it, you're going to probably have way better outcomes if you're doing it with someone, and that doesn't need to be a therapist, right?
Sure.
But if you want that, like that's available. And I think, you know, I was in my last training, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, he was doing a talk in ours, and he's the person who wrote The Body Keeps the Score, which is a pretty famous book. And he said, he's like, you don't want to blow your mind by yourself, right? And I was like, yeah, like there is so much importance of having a safe presence so that you can really go there. Like, I don't think I would have gone where I would have gone if I didn't have some anchor into reality.
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel that same way. If I wouldn't have had like a group of 8 other friends that had done this before, Ben done it, and a couple people didn't do any, just in case, like, I probably wouldn't have been, it would have been so easy to surrender to it.
Totally.
And I probably wouldn't have got anywhere near what I got out of it.
Yeah, and that's what people say. It's all about the set and the setting, right? So set being your mindset going into psychedelics, and then the setting that you're in. You know, because a lot of people, they'll take psychedelics and be at a festival.
Yeah.
That is not the setting always that is great for people, right? There's a lot of overstimulation.
Yes.
You know, like...
That's a big one. Like, not for nothing, because in my brain, I was always like, how cool would it be to do a bunch of drugs and listen to music or watch TV? And I put my headphones on, I was like, this is way too much. I hate this. And same with... Now, I will say there's a particular TV show built for coming down.
Oh, interesting.
And it is incredible to watch when you're coming down.
What is it?
It is called Off Air.
Okay.
It was on not Cartoon Network, but like the Adult Swim version of Cartoon Network. It's on HBO, but it's called Off Air. And each episode, they're only like 10, 15 minutes. And each episode is like, this one's liquid, and it's all like liquid stuff.
Cool.
This one's sound. This one's light. Like, they're all, they're just all short little vignettes over like 10, 20 minutes.
Cool.
And it is like, I've watched it like completely sober.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I feel like I'm on mushrooms.
Yeah, I believe it. I believe it.
So but I can't watch it peaking, but coming down,
it's
the best to just like kind of bring you right back to reality.
That's so cool.
It is really cool. Hopefully somebody does that now that they heard that.
Right?
I want to do that. But I feel like that's a good place to stop. I feel like we can talk way more.
Oh, yeah.
We should definitely do more episodes.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for coming in. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Yeah, great.